I want to talk about Jim Boeheim. As you might imagine, I've had some experience with Jim, having graduated from Syracuse, and he's still there. What's amazing is that I was at Syracuse in the late 90s. I graduated in May of 2001. And at that time, he was already there for 25 years. I've now been gone for nearly 25 years. He's still there. He's 78 years old. And this has not been a good season for them. They've been unranked all season long, unlikely to make the tournament unless, once again, they have some crazy run through the ACC tournament. But this is where they have lived since joining the ACC, unable to keep up with the best teams in the conference, whether that was Virginia or Duke or UNC or pick your poison in the ACC, unable to keep up with them, although occasionally getting to the tournament and then making a deep run. He's made 2 Final Fours in the last decade. But again, those have been runs that have been preceded by really mediocre, middling 500 regular seasons in conference. And so yet another one on the horizon. There was supposed to be a succession plan for Jim Boeheim years ago. That never took root. And so now people are wondering, are you coming back again next year? And he told ESPN's Pete Thamel over the weekend, probably. Quote, I have no other plans. Listen, this has been a question of the day for 15 years. This isn't new. It's just the calendar going, well, he's 78. It's just the calendar. If it wasn't the calendar, if I was 65, no one would be saying anything. And I'm not going to retire just because it's the calendar. Anything can happen, anything literally. We'll just see what happens. I don't say anything because I don't know. Yeah, I mean, look, Boeheim's kind of playing with reality there a little bit. Is it just his age? That's part of it. It's never a good look when your head coach is 80 years old. It just isn't. Not to be ageist, but you come to a point in time where there is so much energy expected to coach. Also, college is a different beast these days than it's ever been. And to be 80 years old on the sideline, unless you're winning big, it feels like the game has passed you by or you don't have the same energy needed to keep up. Now, does Boeheim strike me as doing less work today than he did 10 years ago? Not really. But the question always surrounded how much work is Boeheim actually doing? You know, they play the same defense, the 2-3 zone. His assistants do the recruiting. And most of the game planning is done by the assistants as well. So, yeah, it's true. He's probably not doing less today than ever. But when he says, if I was 65, this wouldn't be a question, well, it might be a question if it's been a decade since you were actually a really good program. Those Final Four runs have camouflaged how middling the team has been. They just are never a top 4, top 5 team of the ACC, ever. It's been a long time. They used to dominate the Big East, but once they started jumping up that next level, and Jim wanted to stay his lane, do what he knew, stay familiar, so they recruit long athletic wing players that don't need to know much defense, and there's not really an offense that's ever run. It's just kind of give people the ball and hope that it goes in. And sometimes you get to the tournament, and that 2-3 zone leaves a lot of people wondering what the hell was that? We haven't seen anything like that, and it perplexes them. And then the athletes that Syracuse has recruited come into their own, and they win 2 or 3 games or 3 or 4 games in the tournament. That has happened a couple of times. Again, that camouflages, though, that night in, night out in a great conference, you're a middle-of-the-road team. You're just one of 16. And so I think it's the way he would like to color what's going on right now. But this is going to be back-to-back years they missed the tournament. And again, by and large, they're a 7, 8, or a 9 seed, sometimes an 11 or a 12 seed in the tournament. If that was ever happening for a decade straight, at any point in his career, I think there would be questions about, well, how much longer do you want to keep riding this horse? When asked about people that would like him to retire, he says, 95% of Syracuse people want me to coach. Why wouldn't they? As bad as we've been the last 2 years, we were fun to watch last year, and we're still fun to watch, and we're still competing. We just played 3 of the top teams of the country to a standstill. If you're getting beat by 20 to those teams, then maybe you say, okay, we'll see. Okay, so when he says 95% of people of Syracuse want me to coach, well, those are the people that he sees at Wegmans who are not going to come up to him and say, Jim, you should retire. If you see Jim Boeheim, the last thing you're going to tell Jim Boeheim to his face is, yeah, I think you're over the hill. Anybody that runs up to him at a golf course, at a grocery store, at a restaurant, are not going to come up to the guy and say, you're toast. Of course that's his feedback, but it ain't reality. I graduated in 2001. I have a circle of friends and alumni that I know from the early 2000s, from the 90s. I have a group of people that either I've mentored or worked with or know from the 2000s, 2010s. Guess what most of my friends, most of my colleagues say? When's Boeheim going to retire? And that ain't 5% of the audience. Okay? So I know personally that 75 to 85% of my colleagues and people that I know that root for Syracuse would like him to retire and have for 5 or 6 years. So he's not living in reality. When he says, well, we're still fun to watch. Yeah, but you suck the fun at a lot of it because every press conference is you sniping or fighting or snorting or being combative. And that's always been his bit. This is nothing new. This was happening in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, what have you. But it's a lot less fun when you ain't winning to deal with that as the temperature of the team. Like the guy that's supposed to be the face of the program that is, because the players change so often now, is the one sniping and griping and complaining and lashing out. So it's not fun. That is not fun. Even if the players want to make it fun, you're sucking a lot of the oxygen out of the room there. Jim gives us a very enlightening quote here. I know it's my choice. I can do whatever I want. I just don't know yet for sure. And therein lies the conundrum Syracuse has found itself in for 15 years. Jim has risen to such a point at the school, which can only happen in college, rarely if ever happens in professional sports, to where you are way more powerful than anybody else that, quote unquote, employs you. You know, in the pros, no matter what the coach is, you're rarely more powerful than the owner. In collegiate sports, Jim Boeheim's way more powerful than the AD, John Wildhack. And so the AD has to sit by and say, oh, no, Jim, you're doing a great job, but you can do whatever you want. And it's on your timeline, Jim. But if you gave John Wildhack truth serum and said, would you like to know what the plan is and what years Boeheim going to retire? He would absolutely say, yes, that would make my life easier because then we can actually put something in place. Then I can have some certainty. And when people ask me, you know, I can have some type of idea of what the next 10 years look like. But you can't. You're held hostage because, as Jim says, I can do whatever I want. He's been completely enabled by an organization, by a program that sees the football team never really quite getting good and all the money coming through basketball, and he's been there for 40 years. And so you bend over backwards. He fills the dome on Wednesday nights in February in Syracuse, and he gives them NCAA tournament revenue, and he sells a lot of jerseys because they've got a brand, and they're on national TV, and that's a Jim Boeheim thing. Like, you can't take that part away from what he has succeeded in doing, but in doing so, nobody can tell him what to do. But at some point, you kind of got to tell the old guy, yeah, well, time has come and gone. But he controls everybody. And he's also extremely intimidating. He goes on to say, it's an awful place we're in college basketball. Pittsburgh bought a team. Okay, fine. My big donor talks about it, but doesn't give anyone any money. Nothing. Not one guy. Our guys make like $20,000. Wake bought a team. Miami bought a team. It's like, really? This is where we are? That's really where we are? And it's only going to get worse. End of quote. Old man yelling at clouds. College basketball, college football has NIL deals. They're not getting in trouble. They're not paying a penalty. They're not on probation. They're not getting punished by the NCAA. It's the way of the world. It's the business of college athletics. You can wag your finger and say that Pitt bought a team, Wake bought a team, but if they're getting better players and succeeding and it's above board, what are you telling them? Well, what are you saying to your fans? You'd prefer to be a losing team even though it's legal to do what they're doing. As you might imagine, Jim then had to apologize the next day for that. I didn't really mean that. Okay, so now Jim is kind of lashing out, and Saban kind of did this as well with Texas A&M. But Nick Saban's winning national championships. Nick Saban is, in the title game or the playoff picture every single year. Boeheim's going to miss the tournament. It would be like if Nick Saban was yelling about NIL and Alabama was 6-6. Boeheim adds, it's crazy. That's why all these guys got out. It's why Jay Wright got out. Coach K got out. That's the reason they got out. The transfer portal and everything is nuts. It really is. Here is one of the most identifiable people in the sport telling everybody the sport sucks. That's why all the legends left. Sport sucks now. Is that now the role that you take on? Ambassador, diplomat, face of college basketball, telling everybody the product is awful. That's why all the people that left. Okay. Don't know if that's the best way to sell a program or the sport. He said, we didn't take any transfer portal guys. If we did do it and did whatever we had to do, I wouldn't feel that good about it. These other coaches, it doesn't bother them. As though there's hard and fast ethics at Syracuse basketball. I mean, let's get real. Like in the 80s, they got into trouble for paying players. In the 90s, they got into trouble. In the 2000s, Fab Melo got in trouble. And they're not above anybody else. Big-time college basketball is big-time college basketball. The same thing with Duke. Anytime Coach K would wring his hands about all of the impurities in college basketball, it's like, come on. If you win, you got to do some stuff. So let's not act as though anybody else is so dirty and we would never do that and other coaches are okay with it. Let's live in reality here. I just think that, he's becoming a problem because you can play the curmudgeon role. You can be like everybody else doesn't know anything. You've done that for 40 years. That's fine. But you got to win. And that's what always has come with it. And now there's not the winning part. And you're readily admitting you're not doing what needs to be done to win basketball games. And then that's another issue, that you're so stubborn that we're not even going to do that stuff. So, think about the talking points if you are the highest paid official, the highest paid employee at the institution, and the face of the program for 4 decades. You have now said, we're not going to do what it takes to win like the other teams. We look down on what the winners are doing. The sport itself sucks. All the good guys left. I'm going to do what I want, and all you people are crazy. Everybody wants me here. And this is the bed that you made. This is the bed. By empowering Jim for as long as they have, this is the bed. And when he does a national radio spot or a national TV spot or jumps on with Kornheiser and Wilbon on PTI, he's charming, he's funny, he's smart. He's all of those things when he wants to be. But when it's a student media member or it's a local media member that he can bully and push around, he likes to do that as well. He likes to tell you exactly how important he is. Again, all fine and good. We're all big boys here. Everybody's an adult, but you got to win. You can't let the sport pass you by in a blur. And what he admitted in this conversation was he has no interest in doing what is needed to be done now. Which, okay, but again, you better find your own way to win. And if you don't play the game as the game is played, and you don't win, and you're tough to deal with, and you don't live in reality, and you're 78 years old, well, now you've run out of reasons why you should stick around.